The worst thing you can do as an elite athlete is maintain terrible nutrition, deprive yourself of sleep, and frown at active recovery. These are some of the things that we're going to be discussing today. And more importantly, I have some great references for you that I'm going to link to in the show notes. In particular, I looked at a presentation of Dr. Mary Morrell, PhD, on YouTube, where she was discussing the relationship of sleep to recovery and performance in elite athletes. I also looked at Tudor Bompa, his book, Periodization, Theory and Methodology of Training. I went further by looking at the Weightlifting Encyclopedia, a guide to world-class performance by Arthur Dressler, affectionately known as Artie Dressler. So what we're going to be discussing in the material today is things that you can do socially that will affect you psychologically and in turn affect you physically in terms of your performance. As we give this presentation, I want you to ponder some of these questions. What mentality underlies your commitment and dedication to durability? During the off season, how do you create your physical and mental foundation? Once the season begins, how do you maintain that physical and mental foundation? What overlying factors and structure are integral to your recovery? What truly sets you apart from your teammates in competition? As I said before, today we're going to be discussing nutrition, sleep, and active recovery. Once again, I have my co-host Shawn Jenkins on today, and we're going to begin this discussion on nutrition. And throughout this episode, I want to also add that we're going to be looking into some of the things that LeBron James does, or incorporating, the conversation of what has made him productive for 15 to 16 straight years in the NBA. And I want to say off the bat that nutrition plays a vital role in his recovery and his restoration. That is one of his major things. And I'd like to start off with, he avoids grain, he avoids dairy, and he avoids processed foods. Now, as I said before, we have Shawn Jenkins on the show, and we know nutrition is vital to sports performance. Shawn, explain to the audience, just that. Why is nutrition vital for sports performance?
Well, before we jump into that, I just want to start off with an analogy using our car. We have our cars, and there are in a lot of cases there are pride and joy, and it's a means to get to our job or to take the kids, to and from sporting events. So we want to make sure that our cars are running in tip-top condition. So we just don't keep driving them without doing some type of maintenance. So we'll take it in for tires, oil change, air filter, so on and so forth, just to make sure the car is running in tip-top condition. Because if you don't, it's going to break down. So we should look at our bodies the same way. Athletes are constantly on the go. If you're looking at the young athlete, the student athlete, they go to school all day, they go to practice, and we have games, and they're running. And that's just a few things, and that doesn't even take into account some of the things that they do outside of school. So they're expending a lot of energy. And so what they need to do is make sure that their bodies are built up, that those nutrients lost, or just food and water, and I'll include water in there as well, is taking in adequate amounts to fuel our bodies for energy so that we can continue to do what we need to do on the field or court. So just as we will take care of our cars, making sure that they're well maintained, we should do the same for our bodies. Now, there's just so much information out there that it can make you cross-eyed. So it's just a few points that I want to bring to the attention of our listeners, and just keep it pretty simple. The topic of nutrition can be pretty cumbersome. There's just so much information, and you get really into the science of it. For the average person, it could be overwhelming. So I want to make this as simple as possible. And so working with the groups that I have worked with, the young athlete, not only young athletes, some of the older individuals that also train and come in contact with. The one thing I do want to bring up is the need for them to start off their day eating breakfast. So many of us skip breakfast. So you figure we go to sleep at night. So we're sleeping at night and then we wake up. On many occasions, people just get up and then they just go about their day without uh, fueling their bodies or putting something in their bodies to do their day. Now, if you look at some of the research, and if you look at the kids who don't eat breakfast, and I would also say this could be some adults. If you're not eating food for fuel, uh, it could make it difficult for us to focus. We could also become tired because our blood sugar is low because we haven't put anything in our bodies. I do know on many occasions the athletes that I've dealt with, come game time, you ask them if they've eaten breakfast, and in a lot of cases, they haven't. They didn't eat breakfast. The only thing they ate was maybe some lunch, and that was several hours ago. And so now they're asking their bodies to perform at an optimal level, but then they haven't put in the proper nutrients for their bodies to function. So there's more than enough research in there that talks about the importance of eating breakfast. And really, breakfast, it doesn't need to be a big meal. You can just have something like maybe an egg sandwich, because that way you're getting carbohydrates and you're getting protein. But I will say that you need to get something in your system. You can get a smoothie and throw things in. I know a lot of people, because they don't have the financial status to do all these elaborate breakfasts or to have all these elaborate breakfasts, they may not be able to have the same things as you spoke earlier about LeBron. They have to eat what's in their house. And so I would say just try to make sure that, it's pretty healthy. But if it's not that healthy, just try to get something in your system so that way, your stomach's not on empty. And if your stomach is growling, it's hard to focus in class when you're hungry. Another problem with the kids not eating breakfast, that when they become hungry, and when I say kids, I also mean adults as well, teenagers and adults, that when you become hungry, you're just going to grab anything that comes your way. In a lot of cases, this leads to overeating and just eating junk food. So not only is eating breakfast important to fuel our bodies so that they can function properly, also a lot of studies have been linked to where skipping breakfast can lead to some physiological issues, such as having lower levels of the bad cholesterol, which is lower density lipoproteins. Also, if you eat breakfast, it lowers your chances of getting diabetes and heart disease, and in some cases, being overweight. So I want to start off with just imploring uh, the athletes, the parents of athletes, and parents themselves to, get up, give yourself enough time to put something in your system, preferably something healthy, like a bagel, maybe with some jam or something on it. Again, like an egg for protein. For those who drink milk, they can have milk, some orange juice, but just get something in your system to fuel your body to start off your day. In many cases, people have said that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and and what it will do is just get your body ready for the tasks that come.
I can appreciate that. And I know that you worked with professional athletes. I know you interned with the Raiders. I know you worked with middle school and high school athletes. And I've never interviewed an athlete who didn't say they wanted to play Division I or go pro. Some of these things, when you consider like the statements that come out of your mouth, I would say, if you want to go Division I, if you want to go pro, let's start eating like a pro when you can. And I bring up LeBron because I've been doing, everybody is ranting and raving about how successful he is in his 15th year in the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
But with LeBron under careful guidance and supervision, he has a team nutritionist, and they optimize his nutrition in the off season by eliminating grains, dairy, and processed foods. For some of you young athletes out there, it might just be as simple as avoiding fast food. And I know, Shawn, we've talked about in private discussions about how kids can come in a weight room and they're carrying in a box of McDonald's or a box of Popeye's chicken.
Mm-hmm.
With him eating right by eliminating grains, dairy, and processed foods, it's beneficial to his gastrointestinal and metabolic systems, and it's helping him shed weight.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you play certain positions where weight is important, it's going to help you by eating a certain way. More importantly, the processed foods, fast foods, grains, and dairy that LeBron eliminates often contain, and Shawn, this, added sugars, poorly digestible ingredients, and they can spike insulin levels while increasing fat deposition.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
The final thing I want to leave with y'all on this is, additionally, grains and dairy account for nearly 85% of food sensitivities, irritating the intestines, the bowels, while increasing systemic or body-wide inflammation. This results in malabsorption of nutrients, increased sensitivity to pain, impaired recovery, amongst other things. And that's what this is about: nutrition, sleep, and recovery. We're going to stay on nutrition right now. I know one of the things I wanted to ask you, Shawn, is what is the process an athlete must consider when focusing on proper nutrition?
Okay. Before I answer that question, I just want to say that first of all, we I know we both realize, and you just using LeBron's example, we don't have that luxury that LeBron has. So we have to go with where we are in the kitchen, and I'm going to put this on the parents. The parents, you have to be that example for your kid, showing them the right way to eat. And in a lot of cases, the parents, uh, and they need to eat better themselves. So if they eat better and show the child how they should eat, that can help them as they become adults. Because we want to look at the long term results. Because for the most part, the way they're going to start eating as a youth, they're going to take that in to adulthood, and then when they're in adulthood, they'll be able to hopefully make better choices, and they know what choices that they can make. So I just want the parents to, and that's why we're going to leave some references for them to really start looking into making this a whole family change, not only for the child, but for the parents as well. And in the long run, it's going to benefit everyone in the family. But to get back to your question, the things that they want to consider, first of all, is making sure that they eat from all food groups, all the groups. Then when I say all of them, I'm going to talk about the big three: carbohydrates, protein, and fats. But right now, what they need to really focus on is making sure that they eat their carbs. And you have two different carbs. You have your complex carbs, where the body has to work a little harder to digest them, and the complex carbs are your whole grains and not your white breads and flours and things like that. Those are called simple carbohydrates, where they break down quickly, get into the system, and they leave. Whereas complex stay in your system, making you feel fuller, and it sustains you longer. Athletes are not like the general population. So you may hear a lot of people who are, oh, I don't want to eat carbs. That is not the case. Carbs are the main fuel source for activity. So athletes need to eat carbohydrates, especially those who are in activities anywhere from 3 to 4 hours, because you're in that activity for a long time. So you really need to replenish what you're losing during that competition. Carbs are important for our muscle function because what it does, it breaks down the carbohydrates breaks down into glucose and is stored in our muscles as glycogen, which will be used when we start our activity. So the body stores it, and when it's time to compete, it reaches for that glycogen that's stored in the muscles, so we can perform hopefully at our best. Now, without the proper amount of carbohydrates, our muscles are suffering. So if our muscles are suffering, we need to make that basket, that move, a slide defensively in basketball. Our muscles are not going to respond properly because we did not properly fuel them. So again, carbohydrates are very important for the athlete, and they should not be shunned. So don't listen to the public or some of the individuals who are saying carbs are bad for you. You shouldn't eat it. That the problem is when we eat too much. That is the problem. Now, there are cases where athletes do need the simple carbohydrates because they want it to get into the system to be broken down so the body can use it. So when it comes to competition, the athlete definitely needs to make sure that they, and even before their games, they need to make sure that they're preparing their body, getting the proper carbohydrate stores in their body. But during the game, you want to make sure, during the game, you want to make sure that you're ingesting enough to keep your energy. And I wouldn't focus so much of being precise, even though the science says we should have 6 to 10 grams per kilogram of body weight. But I would, at this point, just say make sure you're getting some carbohydrates in your body, because for the most part, based on my experience, and not only that, my experience, but also talking to colleagues when we're dealing with the young athletes, their nutrition is pretty poor. They're not doing what they need to do to be successful, to have the proper nutrition to compete. And again, I would say a lot of that can be improved with the help of the parents.
Yeah, I like what you're saying. And a big consideration here is if you're a multi-sport athlete, maybe you play 2, 3, some youngsters play up to 4 sports in high school. And if you're training, at some point your body's going to break down.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're giving you here today is I want you to consider a methodology and a mentality to prevent the body from breaking down. Like, what's your mindset for approaching this? What methods are you using? What techniques are you using? So, what we're presenting here is some considerations. I want you to think. I want you to make adjustments based on where you are economically. Don't just give up. Don't just say, oh, that's not me. I don't make $1 million, or I'm not there yet. There's little things that you can do to gain small advantages that will give you a slight edge in competition. So, to further this discussion, we hear a lot about protein intake and it's important in its importance in the diet. What are your thoughts on protein, Shawn, or what have you found in the literature that you could share
Well, I
with
do
us?
know, from, just over the years of studying, a lot of athletes are really locked into, protein, and kind of forget about the carbohydrates. But one thing they must realize, let's say protein is needed. It's good for the athlete to take it in, but don't take in so much, because your body's going to take what it needs and is going to get rid of the rest. Now, protein is important for muscle development. So, especially after competition, that's when you really want to, make sure you get that in, and probably more than likely days before competition, you want to make sure you get the proper protein in you, and we want to make sure it's lean sources of protein that they're taking in. They're just not taking in any old stuff. But protein is important. I know a lot of the kids think that they have to, go to the store and get this powder protein and doing that, but a lot of them are not financially able to sustain that. So the most important part of all of this is to learn how to use your kitchen, learn how to use the resources that you can afford going to the store. And frankly, I don't think there's really any excuse because we have all these smartphones and you can look up things at the drop of a hat. So if it's really that important to you, you can look it up. There's more than enough information out there on the different sources of protein that these athletes, these student athletes can eat. So if they're, like I said earlier, a lot of them think that's the main thing. They have to eat protein, 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 and they think that eating an excess of it is going to increase their muscle mass. But that's not true because the extra is broken down and then stored as fat, and then you gain in weight, which is not for a lot of athletes something that they want. They want to stay somewhat lean or at a weight level where they can function properly. So just ingesting a lot of protein does not necessarily lead to larger muscles. What it could lead is just the added weight gain. Also, when you take in too much, it can put a strain on your kidneys because they have to process all of this. So they have to work harder to process this extra protein. Again, use these protein drinks sparingly. The only thing that is going to do is shrink your wallet because if you look at them, a lot of them are expensive. And if you're drinking it and using it regularly, it's going to go away and you have to buy more. Whereas you're using your kitchen and eating sources that are whole foods, if you're, which you should do. Some of the sources for those who want to know are beans. Beans are a great source of protein. I also have milk is another one for those of us who are lactose intolerant, which many of minorities are. That may be not something they can take in, but if you're not have an allergy or if you can tolerate it, milk is another option. And some vegetables like pumpkin seeds, broccoli, peas, asparagus are also sources of protein. And one of the things that we're also seeing in the studies that supported this is chocolate milk is a great source of protein, especially after practice, after a game that these athletes can take in because they both contain whey and casein, which is a combination of a carbohydrate and a protein. So, when you're in competition and your body's breaking down, you're going to need to replenish what you've lost. And so a good time to do that is after the game. So chocolate milk is something that athletes may want to consider. Again, if you're not lactose intolerant, which I am, so I can't process milk. So I only take in almond milk. So that's not something that will work for me. But there are other sources, as I mentioned previously, that they can take. Also, eggs. Eggs is another source of protein that are readily available that the athlete and can take in for muscle development.
There's always talk about pregame and postgame nutrition. Mm-hmm. Now, when you consider like post-game nutrition, I'm going back to LeBron James now as a professional athlete. Immediately following the game, his mental and physical recovery begins, and the first step is appropriate nutrition. Now, the goal here with him and what they're trying to do, the goal is to replenish, like Shawn said before, his glycogen energy stores, decrease protein breakdown, and increase protein synthesis. So he starts with hydrating his body with water, carbohydrate-rich fluids. The water helps fight against dehydration, and the carb fluids replenish his energy stores while increasing nutrient transport efficiency. So what that means is he's going to rehydrate the body, but he's going to also eat a meal that's high in protein. Shawn, would you care to discuss on that as far as pregame and postgame nutrition?
Actually, what you described LeBron doing can also be done prior to the game. Because as I mentioned earlier, you're going to need a fuel source already in your body uh, when you participate, when you're in your game. So your body's going to need that for the activity. And then, as you said, after the game, during the activity, you're replacing some of those things as well. And then after the game, those have been depleted, so you need to build them back up. It's just like a car. You run in gas, you put gas in it, let your car operate. Then, sooner or later, the gas is going to go down. So you have to put more gas in the car so your car can operate. So our body's the same way. So after the game, you have to put in a combination of uh, fluids, water or some Gatorade that has electrolytes in it, or some type of energy drink. No, I shouldn't say energy drink because they might think monsters and all that. But an energy drink that has the electrolytes in there and water. So you want that. You also want a good source of protein and a good source of carbohydrates to replenish what we've lost. For our youngsters, this is really important because I've seen so often right before games, as you mentioned earlier on, uh, here they come walking into the locker room with bags of McDonald's. I would say some of them, Snicker bars, candy. Yes, that is energy, but it's quick energy that's going to quickly dissipate, and their body's not going to be able to use it. I mean, they'll use it for a quick second, but it's not for the long haul. So the athlete needs to learn how to fuel their bodies pregame as well as after the game, and that's a combination of fluids, protein, and carbohydrates. And again, it's the same things that I've mentioned earlier that they can start eating after the game. But if they wanted something really quick, they can use an energy bar, or if they have some kind of smoothie that they've made, that may be another option. But at the very least, just make sure you're drinking enough water or something with electrolytes in it, such as Gatorade or Powerade, to replenish what they've lost. So often our athletes finish a game and they just after the game they're done. They don't put anything in their bodies. I know the science early on was saying it was vital, or the optimal time to get it in was no more than 30 minutes after competition. But now they're finding that you actually have up to 2 to 3 hours post game to get it into your system so that your body's at the optimal point to use it. So no longer is it that 30-minute window that we first thought. So, you have a little time, but I would still say after the game is when you want to do it, because if you wait too long, you may get busy, you may forget. So while it's on the forefront of your mind, get something in for that. And then for the youngsters, an option is bring a lunch bag, a lunch pail, or something. Put some things in there that you can have after the game, or you can have the team mom, a designated team mom, or a coach who may be listening. You may want to have these things available for your players. And again, I know we keep using these professional athletes as the example. When I was working for the Raiders, we used to just put little fruit in a cup for them, so they can just take it in and they can have that quick nutrition, that quick carbohydrates for them at halftime. So I'm pretty sure many of us can afford a little fruit. So if there's a coach or a team mom or a booster club that can do something like this, it'll be very beneficial. And the beauty of this is we know that a lot of teams are not doing this. So just imagine if your team is implementing this practice for your players when your opponent isn't. So when it comes down to that fourth quarter, your team is is hitting on all cylinders, while the other team is faltering because they haven't replenished what they've lost. So you're already in an advantage. So this information that we're providing is something that you can get step up on the step up on the competition. So not only if the athlete can't do it, coaches or parents can do this, and they can put this into practice to help the athlete and moving forward. Because when you go to college, you're gonna have someone doing this for you. So it's not really something they have to think about. But at this level, it could be something that we're putting in front of the youngsters so that it becomes the norm for them.
You know what? I like how you kind of encourage the parents, to lead by example for the student athlete. I think that's a really good thing to touch on. I feel like coaches can do the same thing as far as having things up in the locker room, in their office, and then being seen, eating healthy. Sometimes, in the past, definitely with some old school coaches, they might stop on the nutrition part, but that's how we get overweight at times because how we were eating when we were playing, probably not expending the same energy, and we tend to gain more, nevertheless, I like to eat with saute vegetables with coconut oil. I love using olive oil in my salads. I love creating salads, with an avocado base. And we're getting into the fat part of this discussion, and we often hear how bad fat is. What does the literature say about fat, or should an athlete avoid fat intake?
No, they should not avoid it. Actually, it's an excellent fuel source. But don't go hog all over it. But no, fat is something is very essential for us. But too much of it and the wrong kind and using the wrong kind is good. Like you mentioned earlier, avocados are a great source of fat, and it's the good fat that we need. The olive oils, nuts, olives, and if we want to get down to another source of fat and protein, because I spoke about protein earlier, is fish, fatty fish such as salmon and tuna. So you're getting the protein and you're getting a good source of the fats, which our body needs. So don't have the mindset that fats are bad for you. Some fats are, just such as trans fats that you may read about. That's a man-made fat that's very harmful to our bodies, and so you want to pretty much stay away from them. But we do need fats in order to absorb some vitamins and minerals. Also to build to help the membranes around the cells and our nerve endings. So fat is essential for that. It also helps with blood clotting, muscle movements, and inflammation. So even though, again, as I mentioned, for athletes, our nutrition is a lot different than the general public. So don't run from fats, whereas the public made fat the enemy, and that is why we're we're in a we're in an epidemic now where so many of our kids and adults are obese because some years ago what they did, they made fat the enemy, and they went to that fat free craze. And so when they replaced the fat in a lot of foods, it really tasted bad. And so what they did was, to make it taste good, they put sugar in it. So you add sugar, and we start ingesting all this sugar. Now all of a sudden you have this huge onset of diabetes, not only in adults, but now they're starting to find it in juveniles as well. And the studies show that, if a juvenile has diabetes, they're going to end up carrying that into adulthood. So our drive to avoid fats actually propelled us to where we are now, dealing with diabetes. But one thing I want to go back to when we were talking about the coaches and the parents being an example for the kids. They can, if they don't know or they're uncomfortable with with giving this information out, there's nothing wrong with bringing in a professional to speak to the team. I know a lot of cases, hospitals, they have registered dietitians and nutritionists that would love to come out and talk to kids and parents about the importance of proper nutrition. So there's nothing wrong with having someone who's an expert in that area to come in and talk about it. Because let's face it, we don't know everything, and there's somebody that's always smarter in a certain area than we are, and they would love to talk about it because that's what they enjoy. So find another resource, find another person to come in and talk about it. But getting back to fats are essential, especially the good fats that we need to take in. Don't avoid them. Uh, a good practice is to take in a fat that says polyunsaturated or monounsaturated. They even talked about, now I've read that some unsaturated fats are okay. Again, that's in small amounts. So don't just make that a habit and go hog wild with those. But the research and the literature definitely shows that poly and monounsaturated fats are the ones that we really want to make a staple of our diet when it comes to fat, because it is an excellent fuel source for us.
No doubt. I wanted to ask you, man, what are some pregame considerations an athlete might want to make a part of his or her
Pre-game,
preparation?
they definitely want to start not only the day of. Uh, they want to make sure that when they start taking in preparing for practice or their games, they want to start thinking a few days out. And so that means getting the carbohydrates, the fats, and the proteins, and hydrate themselves. So a few days out, start really focusing on taking in the proper amounts of those foods and beverages. And on game day, it's the same thing. Make sure you're hydrated. Try to stay away from uh, high fat foods, again, such as, some fast foods and things like that, or, these snack cakes and donuts and cinnamon rolls. Just avoid that and eat something that's a complex carb. That's a whole grain. So you want to consider taking those things in, because you want those things to be readily available during game time and later on into the game time. Watch out for sodas; they're high in sugar. Um, Definitely be careful of eating some new foods that you're not accustomed to eating. Don't try anything different, because you don't know how your body's going to react digestion while how your body's going to react when it digests this food. Um, Energy drinks is another thing that they would want to avoid, because again, it, all the sugar and the caffeine in there, it'll bring you up and then it'll drop you down. You'll be drained at some point during the competition if that's all you depends on. Coffee is okay. Excess coffee probably is not going to help digestive wise. It could cause some stomach or digestive um, discomfort, but coffee is beneficial. I will say that because it's no surprise that the USOC knows this, and that's why they only allow a certain amount of caffeine in athlete systems. So when they go for their test post competition, they want to make sure that they're not loading up on too much caffeine, because it does have benefits for performance. Coffee's fine, but just don't go hog wild and just have at it. Of course, you don't want to eat too close to competition, because digestively that may be an issue, because you have this food in your gut and the body has to work to digest it. But then if you start playing, then it has to also fuel your muscles that are working. So it has to choose between the two. And for the most part, it'll go to the working muscles, and the energy needed to break down the food you won't have for your stomach, and it'll just sit there, and you'll be uncomfortable. So I have a perfect example of it. Actually happened this past week. I was training in one of the police academies, and one of the guys, he had a smoothie, maybe right before he started training. I would say within an hour. It didn't even exceed an hour. So we're doing our circuit training, and it's intense. We're doing some. We start off with a dynamic warm up, and then we work out for 35 seconds on, 15 seconds in between before rotating. So we're moving, and all of a sudden he says, "Hey, can I be excused?" Because his stomach was upset, and he went and left, and he was throwing up, and it was because he had had that smoothie so close to our workout that it made his stomach uncomfortable, and he ended up throwing up his smoothie. So that was a perfect. And I told him I'll use that example on our podcast. So that was an example of someone eating too close to competition, and it caused some digestive issues for him. Another thing you want to take in, the athlete wants to take into consideration is nothing high in fiber, because we know high fiber uh, um, makes us go to the bathroom. You don't want to do that. Or like eating a big salad right before or before the game, but a little bit is fine. That's perfectly okay. Again, like I said before, don't try anything new or some fast, greasy foods that may upset your stomach, because that will hinder your performance.
The old school coaches would say drinking water made players soft,
Hmm.
and they would withhold water as punishment. We know now how important water is, not only for performance but for sustained life. I wanted you to speak on hydration before we close out, so you might give the audience an overview of the question or hydration, and then
Well,
go into it.
water is important. It's very important. We know our bodies are made up of 70%, about 70% of water. So it would reason the fact that we need to make sure that we're taking in enough fluids, not only water, but any drink with electrolytes, because we lose that through our pores with sweating. The salt and the potassium that leaves our bodies. So we want to make sure not only we're using water, but we're using some type of fluid to replace those electrolytes. We're talking. You mentioned old school coaches. I don't know if you've seen that one commercial, the deodorant commercial, where the coach has everyone running, and then he wanted to give them a water break, and then he says, "Nope, no water until I see this guy sweat." So I kind of laughed at that, and I thought about the old school coach. So he's running everybody to death, but he's not going to give him a water break because this one guy is not sweating. Um, so, um, but water is important, and we do know from some of us up in age there, that some of the coaches used to, pretty much withhold water if we weren't practicing to his or her satisfaction. But I think those days are gone, because we've seen some athletes actually collapse and die because of that, through dehydration. And in some of the cases, it wasn't because uh, they the coach withheld water. Uh, in some cases, athletes were sick. So, in the case of Corey Stringer, former lineman for the Minnesota Vikings, he was sick prior to coming into practice, and so he was dehydrated. So you figure he's probably throwing up, and he had some gastrointestinal issues, so he was coming out the other end as well. So the important thing was for him to become hydrated. But then he goes back on the field, and he's a big guy, and that's one of the things that I implore coaches and maybe some parents, if you're in the stands, to watch the big guys, because they sweat. They sweat, and they're in close proximity on the line. And so they're going to lose a lot of fluids. So this is really important because of their high body fat content as well. And then some of them just aren't in good condition. I know that especially at the high school level, that is the case. But you want to make sure that they're hydrated, because if without that proper hydration, you can cause some issues with their organs. that can lead to some heart issues. So it's very, very important that withholding water is not employed by the coach, and that we making sure the coaches are allowing these athletes to rehydrate themselves, but again, not take advantage of the situation. So if you see that they're using that as a source to get out of something, then that's something the coach would have to address. But again, the water is important for our heart function and organ functions. One thing you want to make sure you avoid are diuretics, which is highly caffeinated drinks, energy drinks, because when diuretics are something where we're going to take in and then we're going to excrete out, urinate out. So we're losing fluids that way. So anything that's a diuretic will cause us to become dehydrated. So you want to make sure you're careful with the overuse of those. Leading up to the events, make sure we're hydrated. Make sure you're drinking enough fluids. That may mean taking, carrying around a water bottle with you, taking some sips to make sure that we're hydrated leading up to the event. As I mentioned earlier, larger players need to stay hydrated, especially when we're practicing outside in higher temperatures. You got to be careful that you don't drink too much because that can cause abdominal discomfort as well. So it's just as a player needs to make sure, as they need to make sure they stay hydrated. And a good way to monitor your hydration level is to look at your urine. So if the urine is like a pale yellow, that's a good sign. But if it's bright yellow or dark, that means you're dehydrated and you must get fluids in you. So that's just the quickest way to tell if a player is hydrated. And then if during the games, because it's a prolonged contest, make sure you're ingesting something with electrolytes, which is found in a lot of sports drinks. So that's very important that these coaches and parents and athletes make sure that they're staying on top of this. I would like to give one plug to the some of these schools that need to start employing athletic trainers, because let's face it, if the coach is on the field, when the coach is on the field, he can't watch everything. He's too busy coaching. He's too busy seeing what's going on in the field, and he can't see what's behind him. But if you have an athletic trainer on the sideline, they're aware of this. They're trained specifically to notice these things, and they can see if someone's laboring, if someone's not getting enough fluids in it, making sure that the cooler has enough water in it, just in case the players may drink it up, or having some extra Gatorades on the sides for those players who need them. So in most cases, some of the schools look at the price of hiring an athletic trainer saying it's too much. But what they fail to look at is the cost in the long run, that not having one could really cost them more than it would if they did employ one. So in a lot of cases, if they had an athletic trainer on the sidelines monitoring these things, which the coach probably is unable to, it would alleviate a lot of the things that have happened on the sideline when it came to dehydration and some injuries as well, for some cardiac arrest issues that some of these players have experienced. But gone are the days of that old school thought where, water's making you weak. Players need to be hydrated. They need to be hydrated because of proper body function, and optimal performance. And at the end of the day, we want both of those things. And without them, it'll be tough to compete in your competition. So, parents, coaches, again, make sure your athlete is hydrated leading up to the game, during the game, and after the game. You got to look out for the athletes, because a lot of times they won't look out for themselves, especially the young ones. One thing we can't rely on is our thirst mechanism. So when I'm thirsty, I'm going to drink. When you're thirsty, that means you already started to experience some levels of dehydration. I would say probably maybe every I think it's like 30 minutes you may want to get a little break, and, the water break, and and the players, they're going to take advantage of it, even if it's a little sip. You want them to start to do that.
Coaches, it's finally here. A workbook for athletes designed by athletes. Something that's going to help your student athlete develop their leadership skills. Something that's going to help your student athlete develop character development. Along with that, we have chapters that's going to help the student athlete define and overcome fear. It isn't for the student athlete to do by themselves. It's for the parent to assist the student athlete. It's for the coach to assist the student athlete and bridge the gap in communication. To learn more, visit sportsmastery.com/buy workbook. If you have any personal questions, drop me an email, drop me a line at Deshawn, DESHAWN @sportsmastery.com. Peace and blessings.